So I recently played the Stanley Parable on PC. I don't have a game for it because it's digital. The Stanley Parable is a really interesting game. It's a walking simulator, but it is a game that plays around with the idea of narrative in video games specifically, and the role of the player in being able to make decisions. I had a lot of fun playing the Stanley Parable. It's a pretty short game. It only took me about 3 hours to go through all of the different narrative beats that you could go through, but it's definitely an entertaining and interesting 3 hours. Basically, as I had said before, it's a walking simulator, so all you're really doing is walking and occasionally interacting with items. But the story is the main focus here, and specifically how it changes based on what you choose. So the game has a narrator.
Stepping into his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. Shocked, unraveled, Stanley wondered in disbelief who orchestrated this. What dark secret was being held from him?
And it'll narrate a rough story outline for Stanley, you, to follow. You, as the player, can choose whether or not you want to listen to the narrator or completely deviate and see what happens when you do so. So, for instance, one of the big things is at the very beginning you come across 2 open doors, and the narrator tells Stanley to go through the left door. Well, you can go through the left door and keep following what the narrator says, and eventually you'll get to an ending where I won't spoil anything, but you'll get to a specific ending. And then if you pick the right door, the narrator starts to comment on some of those decisions. There's specifically one part where you continue to ignore him, and basically he says that Stanley is incredibly bad at following directions.
Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago.
And certain elements of the levels will change. There's complete other areas that you can visit based on if you ignore or choose to deviate at certain points in the game. Overall, I really had an enjoyable time experiencing those different choices and just to what level you could do things that would elicit a response from the narrator. One instance, I just stood in a room, stood still, and the narrator over time just kept saying things about why I was just standing in this room, and eventually got sort of annoyed and then just sort of left. And it's a humorous game, and I definitely think a lot of the humor lands. It's not a joke a minute sort of game, but it's a lot of tongue-in-cheek, fourth wall breaking video game humor, and I definitely think it's really a fun experience. If I had any negatives about the game, I'd say it's a little short. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a game being short, and there's only so much that developers, I guess, could plan for in this sort of experience. But again, it's not that big of a deal, but some people may not want to fork over a bunch of money for something they're only going to get an hour or 2 out of. The music in the game is alright. It's not very prevalent in the game, but it does add a nice little bit of ambiance as you're going through all the different corridors and stuff like that. It's hard to talk about this game because so much of it is just narrative, so I don't want to spoil everything. I'm going to be particularly careful about what I show in this review because I definitely think the whole joy about this game is the surprise you get when you discover different paths along this branching narrative. So yeah, overall, I had an enjoyable time with Stanley Parable. If you can get it on sale, I'd say it's a definite buy. I would also recommend it at full price for people who are looking for something narratively interesting that they haven't maybe experienced in other games. But yeah, overall, I would recommend the Stanley Parable. It's definitely a really good example of a walking simulator done really well.